All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor for Tav Shin Pei Hey, the Tilson family of Eretz Yisrael, as is Chus for Besoros Tavos for all of Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband of 53 years, Dr. Paul Weinberg, parents Moshe Ben Avram David, and Avram and Shindy Kalman, in memory of their parents Jerome and Bernice Kalman, and Alexander and Frederica David. Our week of learning sponsors, Jonathan and Alana Austin of Eretz Yisrael, as a token of Akar Satov for Jonathan's brother-in-law Avi Tobias, introducing him to the Shir. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to give all of us the strength and the wisdom to keep on swimming through the Yam Shel Talmud. Our Daf Yomi sponsors, Matt and Rena Walter, in honor of the Neshama Leibowitz for all of her kindness. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Sav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, Halavai, our hostages will come home b'shalom, and the Karav and our soldiers should be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Today's Daf is Kuf Zayin 107. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem, Kuf Vav Amud Beis. We got up right. We pretty much got to the two dots, but I just wanted to go back just for a second, because remember again, the Gemara had a statement of Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi said, "Achin shachalku," if brothers are dividing up an estate, and halach l'maisa, the way they're dividing it up is through a lottery system. Once the first brother went ahead and draws his lot, the other brothers automatically acquire their portions. So the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi modeled this after the division of Eretz Yisrael. What was the problem the Gemara raised? Is that the division of Eretz Yisrael was done through lots, a lottery system, as well as Urim v'Tumim. So this is not happening with lots and Urim v'Tumim. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara answered, Amravashi Bahu Hano, right in the middle of the daf, Kuvavam Beis. Bahu Bano, the Katsaisi Lahadadi, Gamri Umakni Lahadadi. Now literally translated, with the Hano, that they yield to one another, ultimately, again, each one acquires his portion. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment, because I did this quickly at the end of yesterday's daf. Amravashi, Li'olam Kitchilas Eretz Yisrael Kona Goro. In reality, this lottery, right, this ability that when one brother draws his lot, the other brothers acquire their portions, this is a derivative of what occurred in Eretz Yisrael. It is. But the question you raised about Eretz Yisrael being with Urim v'Tumim, what about by this case? This is incredible. So why does this case work? Since all of the brothers want this to work, right? Since the brothers in this situation, they want it to work. They want it to be that when brother number one draws his lot, he acquires his portion, they acquire their portions, because they all want it. Lashon over here is so powerful. Mishum degamri belevav shalem umakni l'mishi yala garo miyad, because they all agree to this with a leiv shalem, and they want it to work that whoever draws the lot acquires his portion. Mahani Gimar Daitam, their desire, together with the Goral, together with the lottery, works Ki'urim V'Tumim. The Mahani Afilu Heichad Sarbosa, isn't that incredible? So what is the Gemara saying? Since the brothers want this system, right, and they're yielding to one another, it works like the Urim v'Tumim and a lottery. It's incredible, and therefore, Allah Chalamaysa, once brother one goes ahead and draws his lot, the others go ahead and acquire their portions. They both say, please appreciate the ridiculous and overwhelming and profound and holy Musar Haskell. When Jews agree to one another, and they're yielding to one another, that is like having the Urim v'Tumim. That is like having the Beis HaMikdash. There is no greater thing in this universe than when, as a people, we are able to get on the same page about things. Not about it. Remember, we don't know how these brothers generally interact, right? And for all we know, again, these brothers agree on almost nothing. But in this situation, they're all, look at the Lashon of the Rashbam again. Degamri belevav shalem. When they are vested in this with a complete heart, then this entire process takes on the energy as if there were Urim v'Tumim. That is the power of Achdus. That is the power of being vested in something for Klal Yisrael, belev shalem. When Yidden have a complete heart and are totally invested in one another, it doesn't have to mean everything, But in something, that initiative, that event, that moment has the power of Urim v'Tumim. The power of Achdus is the power of Urim v'Tumim. The power of Leiv Shalim is the power of the Beis HaMikdash. The power of Achdus has the ability to make ridiculously amazing things happen. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Very interesting case. Reuven and Shimon, Yaakov died. Reuven and Shimon divided up the estate. They waited till after the Levaya, right? So they divided up the estate. So what happens? So now, turns out, who shows up during Shiva, right? Who shows up? Levi. Who's Levi? This is a little awkward, right? The brother they never knew that they had, right? So Levi shows up. A lot of stuff is coming out about Yaakov during Shiva, right? So what happens? So Levi shows up, and now Levi is owed a piece of the inheritance. The problem is that the estate has been divided up amongst Reuven and Shimon. So now what happens? So Rav Amar Batla Machlokes. Rav says, okay, the first division is null and void, and they have to redivide the estate. Now understanding that there is a new brother on the scene. Shmuel says, no, mekamsin. Mekamsin means no. What happens is Reuven gives a piece of his portion, and Shimon gives a piece of his portion, and that's the halacha. So in other words, the original division remains, just each brother now has to yield something to the newfound brother Levi. Amalei Rav Nachman. So Rav said to Rav Nachman, the Rav Amar Batla Machlokes, according to Rav, who says that with the appearance of Levi, the original division is totally void. Alma Hadar Dina. So I'll say, what do you see from here? You see that even after something is decided halachically, Hadar Dina, if you look at the Rashbam, he says, it's like in the middle of the widest lines, Hadar Dina, Kolomar, Chazeres HaChaluka B'Shel Shenatlu Chalkam Shlomidas. So Hadar Dina means you could walk back a judgment. In other words, splitting up of the estate is essentially the creation of a legal reality. Now that new information has been introduced, we could walk back that legal reality. It goes back, Hadar Dina, Elamiata. But if that's the case, listen to this. Hani Beit Tlasa, the Kami Va'azal, Beit Treminay Upalog. So let's say this. Let's say you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are business partners. They're business partners, and Reuven and Shimon decide, you know what, we're dissolving the partnership and we are dividing up the partnership assets. So they do it without informing Levi about this. So the Gemara says, would you say that in this case, because Reuven and Shimon did the division and they didn't include Levi, that such a partnership dissolution should be invalid? To which the Gemara says, and I will say, by the way, the halacha is, it's not invalid. Interestingly enough, again, obviously we're not getting into the intricacies over here, but halacha makes partners, in a partnership, any partner has the right to dissolve the partnership at any time. And the truth is, in this case over here, where Reuven and Shimon decide to dissolve the partnership and divide up the partnership assets, even without informing Levi, they have the right to do so. Now this all presupposes that the dissolution is equitable and proper. So let's make all of those assumptions. So yet in this case it works over here, even though they did not include the third partner, right? So the Gemara is asking, I would think according to Rav, just like with the advent of Levi, the third brother, the dissolution of the division of the estate is batal, we have to redivide it. So why does it work over here by the case of the partners? To which the Gemara says, no, totally different cases. It's very different. When in the partnership, Reuven and Shimon know from the beginning that's what? What do they know from the beginning? That there's Levi. And when they divide up the partnership, they're dividing it up with Levi. For whatever the reason, they didn't tell him. They didn't include him in the discussions. But it's not that he's absent from the proceedings. In other words, Reuven and Shimon know we're dividing up our partnership, right? We're dissolving our partnership. We have three partners, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Each partner has to get a fair chelik, and they're having Levi in mind. They're just not inviting him to the table for the discussion. But he's included as part of this entire thing. It's different in the inheritance case. So what's happening over in the inheritance case? In the inheritance case, there's no discussion about Levi. Why? No one knew about him. No one knew about him. That's why Rav would say, listen, when Levi shows up afterwards and Levi says, hey, I'm your brother, cut me into the estate, Rav says, okay, we have to be mevatel, the original division, and let's do a new division including Levi. Incredible. So Papa said, so according to Shmuel, it said, no. When Levi shows up, we don't redivide the estate. Instead, what ends up happening is Reuven gives a portion of his, Shimon gives a portion of his, and that's how we give to Levi. According to that, the Gemara says, what does that show? That after something has been decided halachically, we don't walk it back. Right? The halacha or the din stands. Listen to this. We've seen this case a number of times just already in the last couple of days. I say to Reuven, I'm selling you a core of produce for 30 sela. Right? Reuven has the ability, even as we're measuring out the produce, Reuven has the ability, or I also have the ability, to back out on the transaction until the full core is measured out. However, on the other hand, the Gemara says, "Kor b'shloshim sa'a b'sala nimoch." But if I say I'm telling you a core for 30 sela, each sa'a for one sela, rishon kana, then Reuven acquires each sa'a as it's being measured out. Now, what the Gemara is intrigued by this is, I don't understand. In the first case of where I said, Reuven, I'm selling you a core for 30 sela. Core for 30 sela. So now what we're saying is, I'm measuring out the core, right? Reuven's taking the core. Both Reuven and I have the ability to renege at any point until the full core is measured out. But why? Why don't we say that for every little bit that's given, that part of the transaction is done and you can't walk it back? The fact that you can indicates to us that a transaction can be walked back or can be reversed. That's a kasha on Shmuel, to which the Gemara says, at top of Kov Zayin 107a, Hasam Avad Rabbanan Milsa Denechalei Lemocher V'Nechalei Lelokech. Because in that case, Chazal structured the transaction in a way that's beneficial to everyone. In other words, in that case, where I say to Reuven, I'm selling you a core for, right, or a core for 30 sela, it's actually beneficial to both Reuven and I that the transaction not be finalized until the full amount is measured out, right? Why? Because remember, in the event of depreciation or appreciation, right? If it's appreciation, Chazal give me the right to walk out of this transaction because now I can reset the price. In the case of depreciation, Chazal gave Reuven the right to walk away because now he can find the same produce for less money. So that's a different kind of case, because there it's actually in everyone's interest to give Reuven and I the flexibility until the actual transaction is fully complete. All right, beautiful. So therefore, we are left with a fundamental machlokes in Rav and Shmuel, which is Reuven, right? Yaakov dies, leaves behind two sons, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven and Shimon divide up the estate. Then afterwards, Levi shows up. I am your long lost brother, assuming that he's able to prove his claim, right? Say, I'm your long lost brother, cut me into the estate. What do? Rav says, original division buttle, you have to redivide the estate because again, there's three brothers, not two. Shmuel says, no, just let each brother, let Reuven and Shimon both give a little chelik of their estate in order to make Levi whole. Okay, so I'll say, so that is the end of that discussion. Just so you know that Rambam Paskins like Rav, but the machlokes, that in that case, again, we would redivide the estate. We redivide the estate because halacha l'maisa, again, Levi has every right to be part of the original division and does not simply have to go ahead and accept a little portion from each of his brothers. Okay, beautiful. Weiter. Itmar Bosai Kov Zayin with Aleph 107a, second line down. Itmar Achin Shechalku Babal Chovinat L'Chalko Sha'achaman. Another interesting case. Yaakov died. Same case. Yaakov died. Reuven and Shimon inherit. By the way, it doesn't really matter how many brothers, but we'll just go with Reuven and Shimon inherit their father. What then happens? A creditor comes along. Yaakov died and hadn't paid his debts. Right? So Yaakov died and hadn't paid his debts. So now what happens? A creditor comes and seizes property from Reuven, right? In satisfaction of the debt that the creditor had against Yaakov, Zichron Livracha. So now he only seized property from Reuven, didn't seize any property from Shimon. So now what happens? So Rav Amar Batla Machlokes. So very interesting. So Rav says, listen, so now obviously we have to go back. Rashbam says Batla Machlokes, Osa Chaluka Batla, V'chozun V'cholkin B'shavim Min Anishar. So essentially now what we say is like this. Okay, the creditor seized Reuven's property. So essentially now that's out of the estate. Now we have to redivide the estate. Now what does the estate really consist of? What does the estate consist of? It consists of Shimon's portion, but now we have to equitably divide Shimon's portion between Shimon and Reuven. That's Rav. Shmuel Omer Viter. Shmuel says, nope, we're done. In other words, sorry Reuven, very sorry that you lost your portion. But Viter literally means like he's mevater, like Reuven yields. What it means is Reuven lost his portion and Reuven has no recourse. Fascinating. So what's going on over here? So let's analyze. And Ravasi, we're not finished. Ravasi says, Notal Ravia Bekarko Ravia Bemos. Ravasi says, no, Reuven has the right to essentially take a quarter, a half of a half, right? A quarter of Shimon's property, and Shimon has the ability to pay him off either in land or in money. Okay, so what's going on over here? Let's analyze. Three-way machlokes. So I'll say, so once again, Yaakov dies, leaves behind unpaid debt, right? Obviously, a secure debt. So what happens? Creditor shows, so Reuven and Shimon divide up the estate, creditor shows up, seizes Reuven's inherited property as payment for the debt. Reuven now goes back to Shimon, and Reuven says, Shimon, okay, so now I'm owed part of your property. Says right. So Rav says, Batal Machlokes. Rav says the whole division is batal. We have to redivide the estate with the remaining property that is left after the payment of the debt. Shmuel says, sorry, Reuven, you're out. Okay, I'm very sorry. You lost. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm just so sorry for your financial loss now. But there's nothing. You have absolutely no recourse. Ravasi, Reuven is entitled to get a quarter of the portion of Shimon, either in the form of land or the form of money. All right, so let's analyze these three opinions. So Rav Amar Batal Machlokes. So Rav says that we go back and we redivide the estate. The original chalukah, the original division is batal. Why? It's fascinating. Savar ha'achin shechalk yoshin. Okay, so that's just a moment. We've spoken about this concept a number of times throughout our journeys in Shas, which is, when brothers divide up an estate, how do we view them in relationship to each other? Are they considered to be like inheritors? In other words, they each inherit an estate, which means that to a certain degree, they are still bound. Right? There's still a bond between them, right? Or do we view it as when brothers divide up an estate, they're considered like lekuchin, like purchasers, which means essentially they each purchase their respective portions from one another. Now, you'll say to yourself, okay, who cares? Like, well, what's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is actually quite profound. If they are, let's work backwards. If they're like lekuchin, if they're like purchasers, then once the estate is divided, they have no shaykhs with each other. I don't mean from a familial perspective. I mean from a monetary perspective. They have no shaykhs with each other, right? In other words, their portions are not interconnected. They are separate and distinct bodies with absolutely no financial responsibility for one another. If you hold that they're like Yershin, that they're like inheritors, then Lamaisa, they are always bound. So we're going to see over here, this is at the root of the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Rav holds that when brothers divide up an estate, they are always considered to be like Yershin. They're always like inheritors, which means that their respective portions are bound and interconnected. And therefore, go back to the Gemara. Rav Amar, therefore, when the creditor comes and takes Reuven's portion in satisfaction of an estate debt, so because Reuven and Shimon are forever linked as inheritors, Reuven has the right to say, Shimon, okay, this land was taken out of the inheritance pool, so to speak. So really it turns out that the only land that's in the inheritance pool is the land that you're currently holding, and therefore, let's divide that up between me and you. The Rashbam points out over here, but also what comes into play is the concept of breira, which we don't, for our purposes this morning, we don't have to get into this right now, but retroactive clarification. So that's Rav. Shmuel says, Viter. Shmuel says, no. Once the creditor seizes the property from Reuven, Reuven's out. What's the logic? So we'll say this is incredible. Shmuel, on the other hand, holds that no. Brothers, when they divide up an estate, are like they go ahead and they purchase property from one another. Because we'll say, remember again, how does it work? How does it work with inheritance? So, right, the way it works with inheritance is when Yaakov dies and Yaakov leaves behind Reuven and Shimon. What do Reuven and Shimon own? What do they own? What do they each own? So really what they do is they each own 50% of everything. In other words, right, their ownership interests are considered to be fundamentally intertangled, right? It's not the pshat that halacha says, well, Reuven, you own, the east, and Shimon, you own the west. They each own a chilik of everything, and therefore their ownership interests are totally intermingled and intertwined. What happens is when you divide up an estate, essentially, Reuven is buying out Shimon, and Shimon is buying out Reuven. That's how Shmuel understands it. So they're purchasers. And because they're purchasers, once that division is complete, their interests are forever unintertwined, untangled, are separate. Are separate. Yeah, it's easier, right? Are separate, right? Their ownership interests are just forever separate. And therefore, when the creditor comes and seizes the property from Ruvain, Shimon's like, so sorry. Feel free to visit whenever you want, right? But we're not redividing anything over here. So fundamental machlokes that is rooted in how Yerusha works. What about Ravasi? Ravasi misafkele. Now Ravasi, what did Ravasi say? So Rav said we redivide the remaining estate. Shmuel said, sorry Reuven, you lost, but you have no recourse. Ravasi said that Reuven is entitled to get a quarter, right, of the portion of Shimon, either in money or in land. So where does that come from? Ravasi misafkele. Ravasi is not sure. He's not sure if Rav or Shmuel are correct. He's not sure. Are inheritors considered to be purchasers, or are they inheritors? Therefore, Hilchach noter revia bekarka revia b'mos. See, kind of comes like with a compromise position. So he's not going to award Ruvain half of Shimon's portion, but he's not going to give him nothing. So therefore, he gives him a quarter. Interesting. Amar Papa says, Hilchach b'chol hani shmaisisa mekamsin. So Papa says the halacha is in all of these cases, we always give the brother who is out, the brother who has nothing, a piece of the remaining portion. So that would mean in the first case, right? In the first case, Levi, who's the new brother who shows up, he gets a little slice of Reuven and Shimon's property. And in this case over here, Reuven, whose property was seized by the creditor, gets a little portion of Shimon's property. So the Gemara says, Amemar says, no, batla machlokes. Amemar says, no, in all of these cases, we say batla machlokes. In all of these cases where essentially new information comes, whether it's new information in the form of a new brother, Mazel Tov, right? Or it's new information in the form of a creditor that no one knew about who came and seized property. In all these cases, what that forces us to do is redivide the estate with the remaining property. V'hilchasa batla machlokes. And I'll say the halacha is in all of these cases, we essentially annul. We're mevatel the original division, and now again with all the new information in hand, redivide the estates. And I will say that is indeed how we paskin. So as we mentioned, in case number one, when Levi, the new brother, shows up, we're going to redivide the estate totally between three brothers. And in case number two, where the creditor seizes the property from Ruvain, the halacha says, okay, that really should have kind of been taken off the table from the beginning, and now we redivide whatever is left from the estate between Reuven and Shimon. Beautiful. All right, let's go back there. Says the Gemara. Tana Banan. Shlosha shiyardu l'shum. We'll say it's an interesting case over here. Three people come to assess property. But we actually made a little bit of reference to this in yesterday's daf. If you take a look at the Rashbam, so the Rashbam, it's about 7 lines up from the bottom. Shlosha shir de l'shum. So literally means 3 people go to assess or to evaluate property. What is this talking about? Nichse yisomon l'mazon isha v'abanos ve'in shumas beis and pachos negimel. So here's the case. So let's say Yaakov died, right? And now what happens? He leaves behind kids, Reuven and Shimon, and now for whatever the reason, Beis Din has to go ahead and sell off some of the estate property, right? We want Beis Din to do it because we want to make sure that it's done fairly and equitably and profitably, right? So now what ends up happening? So by whatever the reason, whether they're selling it off to support the Yisomim or they're selling it off to support a widow, whatever the case over here is. So they evaluate the property. And what ends up happening? There's a machlokes on the Beis Din. Machlokes, echad omer b'mana. So one says that the property is worth a mana, which is 100 zuz. Ushnaim omer masayim. Two say 200 zuz. So what's halacha? Or echad omer masayim, ushnaim omer mana. Or two say it's worth 200 zuz, and one say it's worth 100 zuz. So what's halacha? Batal yochid b'miuto. So ultimately, so the easy case, Beis Din, you have the majority. Whatever the majority valuation is, that's what you do. And batal yachid b'miuto. We'll say, by the way, it's a very interesting lashon over here of batal yachid b'miuto. The individual is batal in his own miut. So we'll say, tremendous Musar Haskell like this as well. Sometimes one of the most difficult things in life is to try to figure out that if you're saying one thing, and everyone else around you is saying something different, right? So sometimes the world has lost its way, and I'm the one who's right. These are the times in which we are absolutely living. Right? These are the times in which we are living, where the world, in a very large degree, has lost its way, and we are right. Klal Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael are right. But there are other times, I will say, where you're saying one thing, and if everyone else is saying something different, that you're wrong. And it's foolishness to stand your ground. Now, what does that depend on? Everything depends on who the other voices in your life are. Right? So in other words, in the global sphere, unfortunately, we know who so many of those other voices are. And that's why we have every single right to discount them and to ignore them, even though they're the majority and we're the minority. But when you're surrounded by good people and spiritually conscientious people, and those around you are saying X, and you're saying Y, sometimes people get so caught up in promoting their own flag, right? And promoting their own vision, that they don't take a step back and say, hey, maybe if everyone else is saying this, and I'm the only guy over here, batal yachid bimiuto. A person sometimes has to be humble enough to say that I'm probably wrong. If everyone else around me, who are good people, solid people, are giving a different kind of message. Now again, is it always like that? Sometimes it's not like that. But again, that's lashon batal yachid bimiuto. If you're the only person, and the people around you are good people, solid people rooted in a true framework of Yiddishkeit and ruchnius and holiness, and they're telling you what you're doing is not right. It's gaiva, it's arrogance to continue to persist. Sometimes in life we have to be machneh, we have to humble ourselves and say, batal yachad b'mi'uto. Okay, echad omer b'mona, v'echad omer b'esrim, v'echad omer b'shloshim. This is an interesting case. What happens if there's a three-way machlokes on the Beis Din? One dayan says the land is worth 100 zuz. One says it's worth esrim. Esrim in this context is 20 sloim, which is 80 zuz. Ve'echad omer b'shloshim, and one says ultimately it's worth 120 zuz. That's 30 slime, right? Worth 120 zuz. So what's going on over here? So I'll say, so now again, you've got 180 and 120. What do I do in this case? Nidon b'mana. We go with the 100. Essentially, we go with the middle mark. Rabbi Elazar Sadik Omer, Nidon b'tishin. Rabbi Elazar Sadik says, no, you evaluate this at 90. Okay, well, we'll go through where he gets this from. 90 zuz. Achirim say, Osa shuma b'nehem or mishal shalin. So we'll say the Achirim say, and this is quite interesting, the Achirim say, essentially you take the difference between the highest valuation, the lowest valuation, divide that by 3, and add that back to the lowest valuation. Okay, again, we'll see all this in the Gemara. So 3 machlokes. So again, if you have 2 opinions on the Beis Din, we go ultimately again with the majority. 3 different opinions. So 3 different opinions on the Beis Din. There's 3 different opinions about, or 2 different opinions about how to go ahead and resolve that. Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Okay, Mandar Manido Memana Milsa Mitziyasa. So the one who says Rabbi Eliezer, who says that we go with a mana, 3 different opinions. Tanakama, Rabbi Eliezer, and Achirim. So the one who says that we evaluate at 100, so that makes sense. That's the midpoint opinion. Because remember again, in the case of 3 machlokes, what did you have? Since you had 80, 100, 120. So go with 100, that's the middle opinion. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Nido Matishim. Why does he say evaluate it at 90 zuz? Where does that come from? Kasavar, ha'ara, this land in reality was not expecting that Amud Beis, considering the size of these dapim up until now. This is a little bit of a surprise, I'm not going to lie, last night when I saw this. So the Gemara says as follows, but it's okay, tomorrow's short. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Elazar says, Nidam petition, he holds why, ha'ara, this land, Tisha Shava, is really worth 90. Really worth 90 zuz. The one who said 80 zuz, okay, so he made a mistake, ultimately again, by 10 zuz. He underappreciated it or undervalued it by 10 zuz. The one who said 100, which is 100 zuz, he overvalued it by 100 zuz. So the Gemara, and that's why again, that's Rabbi Elazar says, the real value of this is going to be 80. Real value of this is going to be 80. 90. The Gemara says, Adrabah. Why is that? Why don't we say, Hi Aramea v'asara shavya? This seems very arbitrary. So why don't you say the real value of this is 110 zuz? And the one who said 100 zuz, he undervalued it by 10 zuz. And the one who said 120, overvalued it by 10 zuz. In other words, it just seems arbitrary. To which the Gemara says, "Nakot mias trei kamai biadacha the moseres manala mafkile." So I'll say either way. Ultimately, again, take from these two initial opinions that Allah again the mitoras mana, because they at least they're within the same ballpark of a mana. Because remember again, what happens is in this case over here, the 100 and 120, there's at least an overlap over here that they're both agreeing that the minimum value of this is a mana. The guy at 80 is really from a totally different perspective. Okay, so when the achirim say, so osim shuma beinein umishal shalin. So the achirim say that essentially again we take the difference between the lowest and the highest, divide it by 3, add that back to the lowest. Where does that come from? Kasavri hai aratishin utlasa v'tilsa shavya. The land is really worth, it's interesting, 93 and a third zuz. First wide line. So the Gemara says, hai deka amri esrim. So the one who says that it was worth 20 slaim, katoi tlesa utlisa. So he ultimately, again, he's making a mistake by 13 and a half. So he's undervaluing it by 13 and a half zuz. V'hai deka amramana, the one who says that it's worth 100 zuz, katoi tlesa utlisa l'kamei. He's making a mistake, ultimately, again, of 13 and a third zuz of overappreciation. Obedinhu delay matvei. See, normally, again, he would have said, he would have made a valuation even higher than 100. V'hai delok amar, but why? So why didn't he make a valuation of higher than 100? Savar mistoi dekamatfina koli hayachavrai. He says, no, it already doesn't look right because I've already gone ahead and added on so much to the valuation of my fellow judge. Adrabah. So just the opposite. Hai arameo tlesa tlasa shavya. Again, once again, this sounds very arbitrary. Why not just say that the land is really worth 113 and a third zuz? So the Gemara says, Hai dekamramana. The one who says that it's only worth 100, he's making a mistake of underappreciating it by 13 and a third zuz. And the one who says shloshim, 30 slum, he's overappreciating it by 13 and a third zuz. Obedinhu to kamer tfei. In reality, you value it higher. So Gemara says, Savar mistoi to kamer tfina koli haya chavroi. Ultimately, again, but he's afraid to be, not afraid, he's nervous too because he's saying his valuation is already so much higher than his friends. Nakut miya trei kamai biadecha. So at least go ahead and you can take the first two opinions in your hand. Why? The mitoras meya lo mafkile. Because ultimately, again, they are still within the ballpark of meya. Okay, so we'll say, so therefore, 3 different opinions as to how to evaluate the property when you have 3 different judges. Tanakama, go with the middle valuation. Rabbi Eliezer said go with 90. Go with 90. 90 sloim. 90 zuzim, 90 zuzim, and the achirim come up with this formula of the difference between the highest and lowest divided by 3 and add that back to the lowest. And again, all the svaras for each of them. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rav Huna, halacha ke'achirim. So interestingly enough, Rav Huna said halacha follows the achirim. That last approach that takes the valuation of least and greatest divided by 3, add it back to the least. Amar Ravashi, Taima da'achirim lo yadinan hilchasav dinan kavasayim. So I'll say this is great. So Ravashi said, how can you say that we pass like the achirim? No one has any idea why they say what they say. Like, in other words, this just seems to be like a random mathematical solution that it's great because, whenever you create like mathematical solutions, so those of us who are a little bit insecure about math automatically become very deferential. Oh, okay, it sounds like if you're taking the least and the greatest, dividing it by 3, adding it back to the, again, I'm not good at math, so that sounds very complicated, so I'll go with it. You must know what you're talking about if you come up with a mathematical solution like that. So it's so fascinating. So what happens? Rav Huna says, Allah follows the achirim. Rav Ashi says, what are you talking about? We don't understand the mathematical solution. Like, why? Who says that that's a svara to do that? Like, what is that based on? So the Gemara says, Tanu Dayane Gola Osan Shuam Beneyan Umashal Shalin. So ultimately, again, the judges of the diaspora, go ahead and follow this practice. Amar Rav Huna, Hilchas L'Dayanim Gala. So Rav Huna said that halacha is like the Dayanim of the Gala. So the judges of the diaspora followed the Achirim with this mathematical solution. Amar Rav Ashi, once again, Taima de Daini Gola Lo Yadinan, Hilchas Avdinan Kavai, Hilchas Avdinan Kavasaichu. Once again, I understand. Both say, sometimes just because you keep saying the same thing over and over doesn't make it correct. Right? So in other words, Rav Ashi keeps saying, everybody keeps saying that the halacha follows the Achirin. Rav Ashi says, fine, explain to me why this mathematical, what's the word? Formula, right? Why the mathematical formula or model? Tell me why it works. I just don't understand why it works. If you could explain to me why it works. So you keep telling me that halacha follows the achirim. You keep telling me that halacha l'maisa, that the dayana gola pass like the achirim. Rav Ashi says, that's fine. You can tell me whoever paskins like it. I still don't understand why it would work. And until you explain to me why it would work, halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, we're not going to follow. So we'll say, how do we pass in this case? The Rambam paskins in this case, ultimately, again, as nidon betrila. Nidon betrila. So, sorry, nidon b'mana. So the way the Rambam paskins over here is, in this kind of case, we have a three-way machlokes in the Beis Din. We go with the middle approach. So again, in this case, if it plotted out very beautifully what the middle approach is, there was a difference between, there are three opinions, 80, 100, 120. So therefore, the middle approach ultimately again was 100. So that's how the Rambam would pass in this case. We always follow the middle approach. Okay, let's start at least the Mishnah. We have a minute or two. The Mishnah says as follows: So I'll say this is very interesting. So let's say Ruvain says, right? I say to Ruvain, I'm selling you a half of my field. So we'll say, now what's the issue? Now obviously, if I say to Ruvain, I'm selling you half of my field, the half that is located in the southeast corner. Okay, so then I'm being explicit. The issue over here is I didn't do that. So instead I just say I'm selling you a half of my field without indicating which part of the field I am actually selling. So what's the halacha in this case? So we evaluate the field, and we split it in half. We make a division of the field. So ultimately, again, if I say to Reuven, I'm selling you a field, and I tell them I'm selling you a half in the south. So what's the halacha? Ultimately, again, we evaluate it, and ultimately, again, he takes a half in the south. Now, both say, now, it is not clear from the Mishnah what this means. Right? Because again, whenever you see a lashon of mishamnin benehen, what does that mean? What does that usually mean? That means is that we're going to evaluate it and divide it, which sounds like it's not just drawing necessarily a line down the field. So in the first case, I understand that because I say to Reuven, I'm selling you half a field, but there's no indication which half I'm selling him. What's interesting is it sounds like even when I say I'm selling you half in the south, mishamnin benehem, we evaluate it, and Reuven takes half in the south. Now the Rashbam points out there, the Rashbam in his commentary of the Mishnah just keeps saying one thing, Mefarish b'Gemara. It's not clear what this means, we'll see in the Gemara. Okay, V'hu mekabel alav makom ageder, v'charetz uben charetz, v'kamu charetz, shisha tfachim uben charetz shlosha. Furthermore, again, in these cases, the mocher, the seller, always accepts upon himself for providing the area where the gate is going to sit, and the area of the charetz, which is the faro. Again, we're going to discuss in the Gemara what all of these things mean, charetz and ben charetz. So there's a big faro and a large faro. We'll see exactly what those are for, but all of those areas are the responsibility ultimately of the seller. All right, we'll say, v'kami charetz, shisha tfachim, uben charetz shlosha. How big is a regular faro? 6 tfachim, small faro, 3 tfachim. What the faros mean, what they're used for, I understand they're a responsibility of the seller. Gate is the responsibility of the seller. And to be continued tomorrow. Bosai, shkoyach. Yeah.